Mukilteo is a city in Snohomish County, Washington. It is located on the Puget Sound between Edmonds and Everett, approximately 25 miles north of Seattle. Today, Mukilteo is a bedroom community with a small job base centered around manufacturing industries. It is also a major transportation hub with connections to Whidbey Island via the Washington State Ferry System, Sounder commuter trains to Seattle, and public transit services to nearby cities. The city is recognized for its quality of life and is one of the most affluent in Washington State with a high median income. In honor of Mukilteo's 75th birthday, the Lynnwood Times sat down with Margaret Robe Summit, secretary of the Mukilteo Historical Society, to take a glimpse of the city's history through the ages. Hi everybody, I'm Keenan Briscoe with the Lynnwood Times, and I'm sitting here with author Margaret Robe Summit. And we're at Mukilteo's beautiful Lighthouse Park. And we're not too far away from where the Point Elliott Treaty was signed in 1855. Can you kind of talk about what that treaty was and why it was both beneficial to the Snohomish tribe, the original settlers of Mukilteo, and the Americans who came in, I think, in the early 19th century?
The treaty was organized by Territorial Governor Isaac Stevens, who was kind of in a hurry to get a treaty done because of the federal need to get the Indians onto reservations. Well, it didn't work out so well for the tribes because Stevens wanted to move them all to Tulalip, and they didn't all want to go there. Some of them wanted their own lands, and this was not possible for those who lived on Whidbey Island, for instance, and for other reasons. It benefited the whites so that the area could be more open to white settlement, and I guess eventually it benefited the tribes because it brought them federal recognition and some kind of jurisdiction under territorial law.
Mukilteo was the original seat of Snohomish County in early 1861. When did that seat turn over to Everett, and why do you think Everett has since developed more industrially than Mukilteo over the years?
In 1860, Jacob Fowler, who was a co-founder of Mukilteo, established his trading post here. He was the first county auditor, the first postmaster, and so on. At that time, Mukilteo was the county seat, but there were people in Snohomish who wanted Snohomish to be the county seat. And at that point, in the early 1860s, there was a campaign to make Snohomish the county seat, which was eventually achieved. And then when Everett started booming economically in the early 1890s, there was a move to wrest the county seat away from Snohomish and to bring it to Everett. Mukilteo's situation here geographically has determined its destiny as a transportation hub. That is, it's a place that people pass through on their way to somewhere else. People came, it's just a kind of a small town. When it was incorporated in 1947, there were 775 people. And it was after World War II that it got going with the development of Payne Field and especially with the development of Boeing. I think that Everett developed because Everett had the land and because Everett had the economic backing for the various industrial mills. Mukilteo had Crown Lumber, which was the major employer in the early 1900s from about 1907 until it closed in the early 1930s. But after Crown Lumber burned down in 1931, there really was no industry here. Mukilteo was known as a fishing village, place to go fishing. And it had that reputation as a small town. That was kind of the reputation that Mukilteo had until development of Payne Field and especially of the Boeing plants.
Sure. You mentioned World War II. I know Mukilteo had a pretty prominent role in the war. Can you elaborate on that?
Out here, where the new ferry dock is, there was an ammunition dock that was used to load ships to carry ammunition to the Far East. That was in operation during the war, and it was kind of hush-hush. All of that was torn down to make room for the new ferry dock, which came into existence in 2020.
What was it about Mukilteo's location that made it such a central transportation hub?
Right off the bat, from 1860. Jacob Fowler put his trading post here because it was a central location for people who were going to the mainland or who were going to Whidbey Island. The lighthouse was constructed here in 1906 because the lighthouse signal could be seen from ships who were making a decision whether to go east toward the mainland or west toward Whidbey. And it's kind of right there in the passage for the ship captains to determine that. The location of Payne Field was chosen because it was the highest ground in the area and therefore largely free from fog, so that you will have fewer foggy days at Payne Field than any other local site.
So can you talk us through the city's incorporation in 1947?
An election was held. There were several candidates on the ballot. One of them was former lighthouse keeper Chart Pitt, who was a character. Not only was he a lighthouse keeper, he was a writer of pulp fiction, adventure tales, red-blooded tales of Alaska, man versus nature generally. But the winner was Al Tunham. He won the election for mayor at the time of the incorporation, and he was a former school administrator. At that time, the population of Mukilteo, as I said, was about 772 people. In the early days, it was mainly the infrastructure that the mayors and city councils dealt with, and it was a question of just keeping the streets and so forth, all the sorts of things that city government does. And with the development of Payne Field and the increase in population, that to some extent brought more city government activity. It was really the coming of Boeing and especially the annexation of Harbor Point in the early 1990s that started a kind of tension within Mukilteo as to the location of the heart of the town. Until a couple of annexations, one in 1980 and the other of Harbor Point in 91, the center of Mukilteo was right here in Old Town. But as the city expanded, it moved west and south, such that you now have in Harbor Point the City Hall, the police department, and the public library.
What about Mukilteo's history makes it unique compared to other cities in Snohomish County?
The most unique thing about Mukilteo is the lighthouse. It's the point of attraction. It's the reason people want to come here nowadays. The first love of Mukilteans and Snohomish Countyans generally, it's the lighthouse right here.
So speaking of the lighthouse being the most unique thing about Mukilteo's not only history, but as a city compared to other Snohomish County cities, can you lead us through the history of the lighthouse here?
Sure. The lighthouse was established in 1906 as an aid to navigation. The first lighthouse keeper was Peter Christensen. He brought his family here. The keeper and his family, when it was in operation as a kind of a family project, the keeper would live here in quarters A, and the assistant keeper would be in quarters B. The keepers kind of looked upon Mukilteo as a plum job because it was on the mainland and close to other points to travel. There are other lighthouses spread out here through the San Juans and otherwise that require a great deal of effort to get to and from the mainland. Peter Christensen got this job because of some heroics that he had in 1898 when he was assistant keeper at Turn Point Cemetery in the San Juans. He rescued a crew of drunken sailors one dark and stormy night. And for his heroics, he was given this assignment. He was the longest keeper in the lighthouse's history. In 1927, the lighthouse was electrified. Up until that point, the keeper had to go every night with 8 gallons of kerosene into the tower of the lighthouse and fill the tank so that the wick could burn day and night. When it was electrified, the second keeper, Edward Brooks, said it was a much greater improvement for the keeper, and he changed his mind about whether he would recommend being a lighthouse keeper to any enterprising young men who might be coming into the service. in the 1990s, the city acquired Lighthouse Park. And so the grounds of the lighthouse are kind of now a city responsibility, which the Historical Society maintains in collaboration with the city. But the signal is still maintained by the Coast Guard. Recently, the LED light in the lighthouse was put in. Until that time, it was an incandescent bulb. And there was a little switch that had to turn the light whenever you wanted to install a new bulb. Well, that little switch failed, it stopped working. So the Coast Guard came out here, and we're very thankful that they maintained the original Fresnel lens that the lighthouse has. This is the only operating Fresnel lens in Washington State.
Wow.
And it now has an LED light in it that is on for every 5 seconds. That's the unique signal of the Mukilteo Lighthouse.
Now is a somewhat of an interesting time for Mukilteo with the passing of the Housing Action Plan last year and the Port of Everett working with stakeholders in the city to redevelop the waterfront. While Mukilteo enters this new chapter of redevelopment, what would you personally like to see the city done to preserve Mukilteo's rich history?
I would like to see at the ferry dock some interpretive materials that help direct passengers from the new ferry down here. Mm-hmm. This was a concern for the Historical Society when the new ferry was when the ferry was relocated. How do we get people down to the lighthouse from the ferry? It's kind of a walking tour. It's a bit of a hike. If you're inclined to take a walk from the ferry dock down here, it's wonderfully rewarding. It would be nice to have a kiosk in the ferry terminal. It would be nice to have some interpretive materials there as a way of pointing people toward the lighthouse and saying we have a gift shop and so on. That's mainly the concern that I have with the waterfront redevelopment. I don't know if that will come to pass until we see what facilities are in place and then can add the interpretive materials onto them.
All right. Thank you so much for meeting with us, Margaret. You've been an absolute pleasure to talk to.
You're most welcome.
It's an encyclopedia of knowledge.
And do come back to Mukilteo and visit the lighthouse. We have many people from the local area who say they've never been here.
Wow.
So it's right in your own backyard, and I do encourage you to come see us.
I love